Why do you sometimes want to disappear? Not die, not give up, just leave. Delete the apps, change your number, move somewhere nobody knows you, become unreachable. And the strange part is, the fantasy feels peaceful. You tell yourself you're just tired, but deep down it feels bigger than that, like your entire identity has become too heavy to carry. Most people never realize why this feeling keeps growing in Gen Z specifically, because this isn't laziness and it isn't weakness. It's what happens when a human brain is forced to exist in public all the time. You wake up and immediately reconnect to the world. Notifications, messages, algorithms already waiting for your attention. Before your brain even fully wakes up, you're already being perceived. And perception changes behavior. Psychologists call this the audience effect. When humans feel watched, even subtly, they begin adjusting themselves automatically. Usually this effect is temporary, a meeting, a classroom, a social event. But now the audience never leaves. Your brain never fully exits social performance mode. So slowly, without noticing, you stop asking, "What do I feel?" and start asking, "How am I being received?" That shift changes everything. The clothes you wear, the opinions you express, even your sense of humor. You begin shaping yourself around invisible reactions. Not because you're fake, but because the human nervous system adapts to environments for survival. Social media is an environment built entirely around evaluation. Likes, views, replies, silence. Tiny signals your brain interprets as social feedback. The brain takes social feedback very seriously because historically, social rejection was dangerous. Thousands of years ago, exclusion from the tribe could mean death, so your brain evolved to monitor approval constantly. The problem is that your brain still uses that ancient survival system on modern digital spaces. A single ignored message can trigger the same emotional circuitry as physical exclusion. That's why small online interactions can feel strangely personal. Why one awkward post can stay in your head for days. Why you sometimes feel exhausted after doing absolutely nothing. Your brain has been socially on for too long, and eventually people begin fantasizing about escape. Not because they hate life, but because they miss psychological silence. The strange thing about escape fantasies is that they rarely begin during your worst moments. They often appear during ordinary ones, while standing in a grocery store, while scrolling before bed, while sitting with friends. Nothing is technically wrong, yet something feels off, like you're physically present but psychologically somewhere else. This happens because the brain doesn't only become exhausted from stress, it becomes exhausted from fragmentation. When your attention is divided across dozens of identities, responsibilities, conversations, and expectations, part of you is always missing from the moment you're actually living. Eventually, your mind starts imagining a life where everything becomes simple again. Not necessarily better, just quieter. There's another layer most people never talk about. Constant online exposure creates identity fatigue. Your brain was never designed to maintain a stable identity across hundreds of observers simultaneously. Family sees one version of you, friends see another, coworkers see another, strangers online see another. Eventually, those versions begin collapsing into each other. You start feeling strangely fragmented, like you're managing multiple characters instead of living naturally. Imagine carrying a backpack. At first, it's empty. Then someone places a small stone inside. A responsibility, an expectation, an opinion, a role. Individually, none of them seem heavy, but years later, the backpack is full. Most people don't notice the weight because they've been carrying it for so long. This is what identity burnout feels like. Not one overwhelming burden, but thousands of tiny psychological weights accumulated over time. When people dream about disappearing, sometimes they're really dreaming about finally putting the backpack down. This is why so many people fantasize about starting over, moving cities, deleting everything, becoming anonymous. It's not always about running away from life. Sometimes it's about escaping accumulated versions of yourself. Old expectations, old perceptions, old identities you no longer relate to. In psychology, there's something called self-discrepancy theory. It explains the emotional tension between who you are, who you think you should be, and who other people expect you to be. The larger the gap becomes, the more emotional exhaustion appears. Online life quietly widens these gaps every day because digital spaces encourage performance, not integration. You become hyper-aware of how you appear instead of how you actually feel. This is why disappearing fantasies often feel calming. Your brain imagines relief from performance, no audience, no identity maintenance, no pressure to constantly update yourself for others, just stillness. But here's the important part. The desire to disappear is not proof that you're broken. It's often proof that your nervous system has been overloaded for too long. Think about a computer with 50 tabs open. At first, it still works. Then, slowly, everything lags. Battery drains faster. The system overheats. Simple tasks become difficult. Your brain works similarly. Every unresolved social interaction becomes an open tab. Every version of yourself you maintain consumes mental energy. Every notification creates a tiny attentional shift. Neuroscientists call this attentional residue. Part of your brain remains mentally attached to previous stimuli even after you move on. So your mind never fully rests. Even alone, you're partially elsewhere. Partially in old conversations, partially in imagined judgments, partially in digital spaces waiting for your return. Over time, the brain begins craving the opposite state: reduction, silence, disconnection. Not because humans hate connection, but because humans need recovery from connection too. Modern life rarely allows it. There was a time when being alone meant being alone. Today, being alone often means sitting in a room while hundreds of people still have access to your attention. Messages waiting, feeds updating, opinions arriving. Your body may be resting, but your attention is still working. Attention is one of the brain's most expensive resources. Every time it shifts, energy is spent. Every time it returns, energy is spent again. That's why some people wake up tired before the day even begins. Not because they lack sleep, but because their attention never truly stopped moving. Escaping completely usually doesn't solve the deeper problem, because eventually you bring your nervous system with you. The real shift begins when you stop treating your exhaustion like a personal failure and start treating it as information. Your brain is telling you something important about your environment. So instead of disappearing impulsively, you need to rebuild psychological boundaries intentionally. And that starts smaller than most people think. First, reduce passive exposure. Not all screen time affects the brain equally. Passive scrolling creates far more emotional fatigue than intentional interaction, because your brain keeps absorbing emotional signals without resolution. Comparison, news, arguments, perfect lives. Your nervous system processes it all. Instead of asking, "How do I quit social media forever?" ask, "What inputs actually leave me feeling mentally heavier?" That question creates awareness, and awareness reduces automatic behavior. Second, create identity spaces that are unobserved, places where nobody is evaluating you. Psychologists have found that people regulate emotions better when activities are separated from social performance. This could be walking without posting about it, writing privately, learning something badly without sharing progress. Your brain needs experiences that are not converted into content, because identity becomes healthier when it's experienced internally, not always reflected back by others. A private life is not secrecy, it's nervous system protection. Third, practice intentional boredom. This sounds small, but neurologically it matters. Constant stimulation trains dopamine systems to expect endless novelty. When the brain adapts to high stimulation, normal life starts feeling emotionally flat. That's why silence can initially feel uncomfortable. Your brain has forgotten how to settle. So give it moments without input. No music, no scrolling, no multitasking, just space. At first, your thoughts may become louder. That's normal. Mental noise often surfaces before the nervous system recalibrates. Over time, the brain begins recovering its baseline sensitivity again, and simple things start feeling emotionally real. Fourth, separate visibility from worth. This is one of the deepest traps online culture creates. Your brain slowly learns that if you're unseen, you're irrelevant. But psychologically, visibility and worth are completely different things. Some of the healthiest parts of human life are invisible: rest, reflection, quiet friendships, private growth. Not everything meaningful needs witnesses. Once your brain relearns that, the pressure to constantly perform begins weakening. Finally, stop asking, "How do I escape my life?" and start asking, "What parts of my life feel psychologically unsafe to my nervous system?" That question changes everything, because sometimes the issue isn't life itself, it's constant overstimulation, constant comparison, constant emotional exposure. You don't always need a new identity. Sometimes you just need enough silence to hear your real one again. The modern world keeps convincing you that more connection will heal your exhaustion, more updates, more interaction, more visibility. But the nervous system has limits, and healing often begins where stimulation ends. Not in dramatic disappearances, but in small moments where you stop performing